It's wonderful to be here.
And we're delighted to have you, and welcome.
Thank you.
So before we jump into the discussion, I just wanted to highlight that this particular Sciana lecture really does complement the work we've been doing in the Sciana program over the last 2 years. As many of you already know, we've explored different leadership approaches and initiatives across different sectors related to health. We had featured and we had discussed with Vitenis Andriukaitis, who was leading the European Health Union around that specific supranational initiative. We've also invited Michael West and Sciana member Bob Klaber from the world of health services to talk to us about compassionate leadership, kind leadership, and how that's important for supporting not only patient safety, but also the business bottom line in healthcare. We heard from Effie Viana recently. She helped us to reflect further on ethical leadership. And now with Bruno coming from the business world, we'll be able to learn a bit more about a groundbreaking innovation called the Economics of Mutuality and how that can help all of you and other leaders to shape a more resilient health system. Now, Bruno has a fascinating background. I won't go into too much depth. He'll tell you more about it. I do encourage you to connect with him over the coffee breaks if you haven't already during the walk around the lake. But by way of introduction, I'll mention that he is founder and leader of the Economics of Mutuality Foundation and the founder and CEO of, and the former chief economist of at the Mars Incorporated company. And so that really leads us nicely into the first question. As I mentioned, the story behind the Economics of Mutuality is quite interesting. While at Mars, Bruno, you were tasked with an interesting question to answer as chief economist. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about this unique business project that you led and how it led to this new initiative.
Very good. Can you hear me better? Maybe this way? Okay, I think because I don't have a strong voice, so maybe it's better to speak with a microphone. You may actually wonder what an economist is doing in such a gathering, right? And I met a few economists during the walk, but not many. And but you know, economics. When I teach economics to my students, I say, well, economics is nothing more and nothing less than the management of scarcities. And we all have scarcities to manage in our different. I'm going to stop that. We have different kinds of scarcities. We have scarcities of natural resources, for instance, right? We have scarcities of well-being. We have scarcities of purpose. We have scarcities of leadership. So eventually, economics is not just about managing profit and financial capital. It's about actually addressing different forms of scarcities. And even the word company, which we use extensively in the business language, comes from two words in Latin, cum, panis, which literally means the sharing of the bread. So it's about fellowship, it's about communion, it's about people relationship. So when you run a company, you're eventually running a fellowship, not a business. And so I'm glad to share with you a little bit what it means, of course, for a business, but also for the organization that you are managing. And during the walk, I was talking with Louise, and she talked about the concept of systemic leadership, right? And systemic leadership assumes that it's all about relationship in a complex system, in a complex ecosystem of different stakeholders. And we all come from the Western world here, and there is an overemphasis on the individual, in not all of us maybe, but there are an overemphasis on the mutual, on the individual in our culture. Other parts of the world put emphasis on the group, right? And essentially, the concept of value creation, the concept of impact, the concept of efficiency has to do with understanding the complexity of the relationship in which we are involved. And economics is all about that. And in a business context, it is true that we've been trained over the last 50 years that the purpose of business is to maximize profits. for the benefit of the shareholder. Okay, and this system actually, like slavery, worked very well, but for a few, right? And it created a lot of scarcities in the ecosystem, scarcities in natural resources, scarcities of common prosperity, scarcities of well-being at work, scarcities of well-being in society. And essentially, it is my argument that actually this concept of profit maximization is an ideology, right? And like any ideology, it will collapse. Marxism was based on the ideology and eventually collapsed in 1989, right? My argument is that financial capitalism will also collapse, not necessarily on the Berlin Wall, but maybe on the wall of Wall Street. Eventually, it will implode. But business existed before capitalism and will exist after capitalism. I mean, business is part of how we do business. I mean, you guys are doing business. You are not necessarily focusing on the profit maximization, but you are focusing on providing something to society. So we are and that's why the concept of economy and the concept of business are so interrelated. And the notion of profits, which actually was a question I was asked in 2005, I will never forget. Actually, I was just being appointed by the chief economist of the company. I was young, and I was wondering what I was doing, because essentially to me, being a chief economist was more like doing long-term strategic thinking, etc. And I found it a bit dry. But very quickly, I was involved in an amazing conversation between the board of the company and management. And the question that came to me said, Bruno, we want to understand what should be the right level of profits. And the question was not asked in the context of should I make more profit or should I make less profit, but is there a level of profit that would eventually help the company be more resilient in the face of crisis, be more intentional in the management of the resources that we have in our ecosystem, be more also cognizant of the potential waste that we are creating. And there was this idea that the chairman of the board gave me, that you'd see any chain is as strong as its weakest link. If the weakest link breaks, the whole system could be disrupted. And eventually, if you take too much profit, in the context of the company, from the value chain in which you are, you may eventually break the whole ecosystem and eventually end up being in a disrupted situation. So you see the analogy between your job and our research. So we started on this journey, and to our surprise, actually, this concept of the right level of profits, or maybe the right level of performance, was a completely blind spot in the literature. Nobody studied it, at least in economics or in management or in finance. You could find some ideas in sociology, in philosophy, and I was glad actually, because beside I studied economics. I mean, I was good in math, but I was not good in physics. So I eventually ended up in economics and in finance. So I did my PhD in finance, right? So I asked for forgiveness for that, right? But in parallel, I studied theology. And actually, my education in theology was much more useful, actually, than my education in finance and economics to solve these questions. But you see this concept of what is enough. Okay, what is enough? And I remember there was a quote from St. Paul who said that the love of money is a source of all kinds of evil. It is the only sin in the Bible for which it is said that it is a source, not the only one, but a source of all kinds of evil. So there is something also related to our business. So the love of money is a kind of reflection of a void that we have in our organizations. And in a sense, this concept of systematic or systemic leadership is a way actually to understand that the real value behind value creation is when the sharing of benefit is embedded into the value creation model, not the other way around. The way most business works is that you make money one way and eventually you spend it the other way. So you are dysfunctional in the way you create your money, and you are dysfunctional in the way you distribute it, right? A higher level of value creation is actually to ensure that the sharing of benefit or the sharing of value is embedded into the way you create your own value. And that's what we are proposing with the economics of mutuality. Mutuality in English is a concept of the sharing of benefits. And so a mutual benefit is a shared benefit, and a shared benefit will endure. So this notion of sharing, connected with performance and resilience, is at the heart of the concept of a mutuality. And mutuality is a scarce resource because the world is not mutual. That's why we need an economics of mutuality. And this is what I'm trying to share with you today.
Perfect. So we had discussed maybe breaking it down to simple terms, and you have already. What is the economics of mutuality? We've been unpacking some big ideas already with Cohort 4, the economy of well-being, the social contract. So this complements quite well. Looking into the future and thinking more about impact and leadership, what problem is the economics of mutuality tackling? And what does it seek to achieve in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I remember, I think this morning I was involved in a conversation in Cohort 4, and Richard, where is Richard? It's okay. So Richard, you said something about purpose this morning, and you said eventually that purpose is a critically important topic, but not only as a standalone topic, but also as a way how people relate the purpose of the organization with their own purpose. In a sense, one of the critical quality of leadership, in my view, over the next period, is that because we are entering into a period of systemic crisis. I mean, it started, you could argue that we had 70 years of peace, right, of relatively nice weather between the end of World War II until the year 2008, roughly. And ever since, we're starting to have a series of crises, and each crisis being more severe, and so there is an increase of frequency and severity of crisis. So I think we have to live with the idea that the crisis will be the norm and not the exception. We are entering into a period of systemic crisis. And in period of systemic crisis, you need to develop different kinds of leadership. And there is this African proverb, which I like very much, that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. But in order to go together and to go far, you need to have something that unites you. It's called purpose. And the purpose is not a vague word, right? The purpose is not about talking about what you do. It's not like a marketing slogan. It's about actually solving a problem for other people. So you are in the very clear industry, right, where you can solve obvious problems for other people, because actually the health industry is all about solving health issues, right? But you see, these concepts, you may actually forget it, right? But health is so vague. So the real notion of purpose, and if you want to bring leadership behind the notion of purpose, and you want to put your purpose into practice, you need to work hard on what systemic problem you want to solve in the ecosystem in which you operate, and for which you have some legitimacy, and for which you have some competencies, right? So it tends to limit a little bit the scope of the type of purpose you can choose as an organization. And leadership is all about defining that purpose, or help defining that purpose, and also build the organization around that purpose. And this is actually a fundamental shift in the way organizations will be organized, because most organizations are self-centered. I mean, I'm always amazed when I look at the purpose or the mission of companies. It's all about me. It's all about my organization. It's I, me syndrome, right? And this actually works fine if you are in the business of maximizing profit for you. Perfectly well. Unfortunately, this model is no longer fit for the type of situation in which we are going to operate. And I can really foresee that. You see, I said at the beginning of my talk that economics is all about the management of scarcities. Guess what? 50 years ago, financial capital was scarce, but natural resources were overly abundant. Today, it is just the opposite. Financial capital is overly abundant. There is too much money around, but we have natural resources shortage. So I'm not an ideologist, I'm not a communist, I'm not a socialist, I'm just in a basic economics. I said the economic system will adjust to address this new form of scarcities. Hopefully, we will address it collectively through research, knowledge, good practice, and not through wars and catastrophic events, but the economic system will adjust. And any organization actually is responsible to actually adjust the way it's mobilizing resources to address the scarcities that are relevant to their own organization. It's true for business, it's true for NGOs, it's true for government, it's true for foundations. So it is actually the model. That's why financial capitalism is no longer a model that works, because financial capitalism is all about producing financial capital, usually at the expense of natural resources and people. So that model actually is going to stop. And there are some interesting work at the EU level in particular about regulating actually this kind of practice, and it will happen. So what it means for organizations like you, it starts with a notion of purpose. You should think about what is your purpose of your organization. So what systemic problem you try to solve? And what are your competencies to do this? And what are your legitimacy to do this? Once you have this, you do something very important. You decenter yourself. You are no longer at the center of your organization. You become just one stakeholder, material to the purpose you have chosen. I gave you an example of a healthcare company that we've been following and working with, Novo Nordisk. Right? Novo Nordisk, as you know, is in the business of selling more insulin. And they could have chosen that their purpose is to sell more insulin to treat more diabetic patients. Eventually, they chose a slightly different model. They say, we are in the business. Initially, they wanted to be in the business of eradicating diabetes. And eventually, they chose changing diabetes. But when you are, this is a subtle change, which actually means a lot. Because if you want to change diabetes, it's not only about selling more insulin. It's about actually organizing an ecosystem of players that actually are all relevant material to changing diabetes. It could be water consumption, food safety, sports, whatever. Okay, and it's a model that we studied, and that it showed actually that as you are in the business of choosing a purpose this way, you are de facto in the business of organizing or orchestrating an ecosystem of players that actually are all material to the purpose. So you see, it requires a different type of leadership. It requires building trust. It requires understanding the other needs. It's about putting all the others before yourself, right? It's all about investing in the ecosystem in which you operate, hoping that eventually, as the ecosystem increase in terms of efficiency and performance, you will get a fair return of your investment. And what we have demonstrated over the last 15 years, that business that works this way, not only actually are more, in a sense, impactful on society and the environment, but they are also more performant in terms of bottom line. But they are also more resilient. Because you know, it's easy to copy a product. It's easy to copy a strategy. You cannot copy a relationship. And you cannot copy a network of relationship. So building a network of mutual relationship, this is where the concept of mutuality comes into the equation. Building a network of mutual relationship is a way actually to build a resilient model. And it goes back to our discussion at the beginning. As we are facing, we are shifting into a paradigm of systemic crisis, the logical answer to this is to build resilient organizations. You cannot build resilient organization on your own. You need others. And it is a network of stakeholders organized behind a purpose in which you are nurturing mutual relationships that eventually will lead to this kind of resilient organization. But in order to do this, you need, of course, as I said, define your purpose properly, understand the key stakeholders in your ecosystem that are material to your purpose, building a mutual relationship with each of them, and then, because I'm an economist, measure. Because you only manage what you measure, right? Numbers matters. Words matters, but numbers matter too. So to give an economic reality, an economic weight to mutuality with, in terms of social capital, the quality of relationship, right? Mutuality in terms of human capital, the quality of the individual in which you work with. Mutuality with the land, so how you relate to natural resources, but also mutuality with the financial capital that you need to operate, is what defines, in our view, the new frontier for value creation. So in a nutshell, this is what economics of mutuality is about. I hope I'm not losing you.
Well, thank you for that. I think the next...
Maybe tell me how are you with me?
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Well, I think this is resonating quite well because we've been talking about these topics of belonging. We've been talking about trust, whether it's been in our cohort 4 meeting yesterday and over the last 2 days, or whether it's been online in our intersessional program. But maybe what could help us further to understand this, for anyone who's thinking, how does this work practically? How do we redefine purpose or build those relationships? How do we organize that ecosystem well? Perhaps you could give us a very concrete example of how this business model or management innovation has led to change.
Yeah.
What has it involved, and what were the outcomes?
Yes, so I'm going to use a healthcare example, but not human health, pet health, animal health. One of our partner is a big pet food company, and it's one of the major pet food companies in the world, and we've been working with them because they were they had this vision to say, are we just a pet food company, like making pet food and the best? How many of you have a cat or a dog? All right, okay. So what type of relationship do you have with your pet? Is it like just a companion or a member of the family, or?
My child.
The child?
My child.
Okay. It's fascinating actually how the relationship between cats and dogs and human beings is relatively is very old actually. I mean, human beings have always lived with animals, and actually it goes back. I mean, this is my theologian background, but you saw at the very beginning in the Jewish culture, eventually the families were living with a little sheep or a little goat, and it was their pets, right? And eventually they had to sacrifice them for their sin. So you could argue, I mean, would you sacrifice your cat because you've been sinning? So there's always been a very unusual relationship, and I think over time, this relationship between animals and humans have always been part of the human fabric. So I discovered that it's very fascinating. But eventually you say, well, are we a pet food company, just selling best pet food for, right? Or are we something else? So eventually working with them, they say, no, we are not only a pet food company, we are a pet care company. So we want to look after the well-being of the animal. But more than that, actually, because there is such an important relationship between cats and dogs and the cats and dogs owners, that eventually you know that people who own a pet have better physical health. They also have better mental health. And actually during COVID, this company just exploded because people were so alone in their apartment that eventually they buy a cat or a dog, and the business exploded. So there is a very interesting relationship between cat and pet ownership and human well-being. So we've been working with them, and eventually they said, okay, we are a company that actually can provide health through food. And as we were doing this exercise with them, they said, no, we are eventually a health company. We are here to increase the health of cats and dogs. But when you are in the business of improving health, you are all of a sudden dealing with veterinarians, with breeders, with universities, with pet shops, with insurance companies, etc. So all of a sudden you have like a whole ecosystem which is actually material to the notion of health. So it was interesting because they accepted to say, okay, we are going to decenter ourselves, and by doing this exercise of mapping the ecosystem of the key players, material to the concept of health, they discovered a whole ecosystem of players which were actually was not functional. I mean, this is how we discovered, for instance, that veterinarians have the highest level of suicide. It's one of the most, I mean, we discovered this. I mean, it is a real. I mean, when you talk about systemic problem in the ecosystem, it is a real one, right? It's one of the most, And then we have some hypotheses, because eventually people become veterinarians because they love pets and not people, and eventually, but they have to deal with pet owners, and they don't like it. So there is a whole, and many of them actually are deeply indebted. They don't know how to manage their business. So we discovered actually a series of pain points. So pain points around the well-being, right, of veterinarians. We discovered some pain points also in the relationship between the veterinarians and the breeders, and the veterinarians and the consumers, right? So all kinds of dysfunctional pain points in the ecosystem, which eventually are not directly related to the company, because essentially we are talking here of two different stakeholders that actually don't work with each other, but to what extent it's not, I mean, you have no moral or no legal responsibility to eventually. But by doing this exercise and in a sense enlarging the boundaries of the responsibility of the firm, we discovered with them that actually there was real pain point. And by fixing this pain point, eventually the whole ecosystem was functioning better. And by functioning better, eventually the company itself took its fair share of the business. And it's actually a company that actually grows double digit. And so in terms of financial performance, which in business is a proxy, if you like, for the efficiency of the business, it was a very interesting outcome. But over time, I mean, I'm not going to share with you in detail because it's really like deep economics, but we know how to measure social capital. So the level of trust, or the level of the quality of relationship between two individuals or two organizations. We know how to measure it's a human capital. We know how to measure the natural capital, you see, and we of course know how to measure financial capital. And what we're demonstrating is that as an organization, when you invest in interventions that would solve specific social capital, human capital, natural capital problem, not only you are all of a sudden actually becoming much more purpose-led, and you're bringing more people behind you, you are the moral of the organization rises up, but also it has a direct impact on the efficiency of the organization. So that is why we are proposing here a model which actually is not about just criticizing the financial capital aspect of the economy, but to say it's really incomplete. Managing only financial capital is not bad as per se, but it's so incomplete that by doing this, you are eventually missing big opportunities to fix problems at a profit. And the vision we have is that at the moment, many organizations profit by creating problems. Okay, so they're making money, but they're also creating social, human, and natural capital problems. But it's not an obligation. You can actually profit from creating solutions. But you see, this mindset is. But if you are in the business of profiting from creating problems, you can only. It's more like a me, self-centered organization. If you want to profit from creating solutions, you need to organize a whole ecosystem, and that whole ecosystem is the methodology that we're proposing. Starting from the purpose, mapping the ecosystem, identifying the pain point in the ecosystem, classifying this pain point in terms of social, human, natural capital problem, then highlighting the interventions that actually are necessary to fix this problem, and eventually, because I'm an accountant and a finance guy, so that it ends up in what we call the management account. The profit and loss statement is incorporating this element of positive and negative externalities. So eventually, we are, after 15 years of research, I came back to my board and say, I don't have a magic number about what should be the right level of profit, but we have a process to help you define what it is, and eventually could help you guide where you should allocate your resources to fix the most relevant problem in the ecosystem in which you operate.
So you've described, and very nicely, a process for responding to these number of important elements for achieving this economics of mutuality. Now, if we go back to leadership, you've highlighted an important link between leadership and purpose. You've highlighted the importance of trust capital, of social capital, and I'd really like to learn a little bit more about the training that you've done with current and future leaders to have the right skill sets and mindset to make this change.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a process, but there's a mindset that needs to be established. Could you tell me more about what does that future leader look like and what are the qualities that are key for leading the kind of transformation that you're seeking to achieve?
Yeah, you're touching an important point, because of course there is a process that we can actually drive people through, but it starts with you, right? It starts with, if you are not, if you are not in the business, if you are not in the mindset of eventually realizing that what defines you is the type of relationship you have with others. And what defines your organization is the type of relationship that the organization has with other organizations. And human beings are relational people. Eventually, I'm a theologian, so I always go back to the scriptures. And even in the book of Genesis, in the Jewish culture, when God created humankind, in Hebrew, it is clearly said that He created mankind according to His image and His resemblance, and He created them, man and woman. So the man alone is not in the image of God. The woman alone is not in the image of God. This is a relationship that is in the image of God. So it's very interesting to see that even in our culture, it is a relation that actually gives us our, in a sense, identity. So that we can be like God, we can be creative, So the relationship is critically important. So a leader that does not understand the importance of relationship and how to build a functional relationship is not a good leader. Because you can have different types of relationship. You can have abusive relationship, you can have power relationship, you can have authoritarian relationship. And these actually are dysfunctional elements of relationship. What we are promoting is a mutual relationship. So it's about honoring the other, so understanding, to give the right weight to the other person. So it's not an egalitarian model, right? It's about actually, it's more a fair model. So what we've done is that we've been partnering with Oxford University for many years, for almost 10 years now, and we developed what we call an executive education course. I'm very happy to share that with you all, because every year we train between 80 and 100 people in exactly what you are talking about, what it takes actually to become a leader that actually is building an ecosystem of relationships that is actually mutual, and how you can practically put this into practice, right? So this is element. Now, in terms of the qualities that's for leader, which actually your question, first of all, it's all about actually decentering yourself. Okay, the same way you need to help your companies to decenter itself, you yourself. You need to decenter yourself. So it's really important to understand that it is a lesson I learned from my first boss, actually. He said, one of the hiring techniques that I'm using now is that when I hire someone, I always hire someone who is better than me. So I learned it very early in my career, and I think it was the best hiring advice that I ever had. It requires actually a sense of humility, right? But also it requires also that you are genuinely interested in the other person, right? So hiring people who are better than you is, to me, the first mark, if you like, of a leader. The second thing is about, second element is about the whole, to me, the new frontier for leadership is about giving meaning to the action, to what we do. It's about it's the notion of purpose, about giving a sense of direction, a sense of meaning. So, because you see, there is always a story of which you find in different culture, but the story I know is it was Henri IV in France who was visiting the building of the Cathedral of Paris, and he was asking the laborers, people who were working there, and he asked the first man, he said, "What are you doing?" And the first man responded, "Sir, I am building a wall." Okay. And he asked his neighbor, and he said, "And you, what are you doing?" And the second guy said, "Sir, I am building a cathedral." The two were essentially doing the same thing, right? They were putting stones over stones. One had the vision, he was building a wall. The other one had the vision, he was building a cathedral. Okay, leadership is about having the organization believe that they are building a cathedral. Okay, so this notion of purpose and give meaning. And the third element, in my view, is also to have a sense of legacy. So it's not about you, right? It's not just about, so you see there is a temporal element, there is how you relate with other people in your own time frame, but essentially there is always a time when you have to essentially give a legacy, right? And that legacy is part also of every leader should think about the legacy he wants to leave, right? And legacy is about being humble and believing actually the one that will succeed will be better than you.
Very good, thank you.